It's the hardest and rarest thing, listening to the din of voices that are around us, to discern the direction and the call of God. But then to gather up, the courage and the faith to seize the day, the moment, and bracing your feet against the rock of ages to swing this unwilling world around, well, that is true service to the reign of heaven, to the next beautiful thing that the God of creation will unfold. That's what we're doing here. This morning, all the mornings we'll be together. We're looking for a way to discern the call, brace our feet against the rock of ages, and swing this unwilling world around. I'll just briefly tell you what we're going to do over our time together. We'll begin by settling in and considering the kind of impact that our current crisis is having on our lives, reflecting on where we are. But knowing that the presence of God within our lives allows us to move from a place of despair to a place of hope, we will then sing praises. You don't actually have to sing if you don't want, though you can if you want to. There'll be something to lead you. We'll then begin, or we'll continue the conversation with the scriptures. I'll read a text and then I'll give a message. And you remember from last week that I looked at the sermons that I preach as a next word in a conversation, and I kind of expect that I'll get a word back. And so we'll settle in, listen to some music, and consider what the Spirit might be saying in the words that I had to say. And then I'll give you an opportunity to make comments if you'd like in the chat box, some of which I'll read. And then we'll settle into about 5 minutes of silence, after which we will express our hopes, our dreams, our despairs, whatever, to the presence of the one that loves us. And finally, we'll close. I said last week I was trying to figure out a way to do conversation. Some people wrote to me and said they'd like to do that. Other people would probably prefer not. And so I would encourage you to stay until the end of the slides at the end of our time together, and I'll turn on the cameras and the microphones and we can have a conversation. But that's only if you want. So for right now, let's settle in. We can begin, if you want, you can close your eyes, but take a deep breath and turn inward, because a lot's happened over the last week. We've seen the infections start to skyrocket, the deaths double in one day. We've seen a $2 trillion stimulus package passed. That concerns me a little bit. But my cousin assures me we can print all the money that we want as long as we don't have inflation, so I'll settle down. But we've also gone through a week where we're cramped in our houses, sometimes with people we haven't seen in a while, and we have to renegotiate relationships. How is it impacting you? Do you find you're getting testy and discouraged? Do you find you're confused? Most of us, it seems like a cycle. Maybe you're disappointed in yourself. If you were with us last week, you might have developed some intention of something you wanted to do during the week past. How'd it go? For some of us, it may have worked out well. For others, life might have just gotten in the way. But please know, whatever flaw you may have, whatever dream left unfulfilled, whatever tragedy may be falling you, whatever worry and concern. You are an expression of the creative power and love of God. And God will carry you from despair to hope, from death to new life. I don't know if you feel up to singing. Maybe you just want to let the praises of the one who loves us carry you forward. Our text of scripture this morning comes from the very beginning of what's called the Sermon on the Mount. It's a moment after Jesus has begun teaching where he sits down on a mountaintop or on a hill and teaches all the people that have come to him. It's actually probably not something he ever did in just this way. It's a construction that the author of this gospel put together so that we could get many of the teachings that had developed and grown out of Jesus's words. So listen for the Spirit to bring something to you. Seeing the crowds, Jesus went up on the mountain. And when he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the reign of heaven." Blessed are the poor in spirit, the spiritually impoverished, for theirs is the reign of heaven. Theirs is what carries us forward. If I were to paint a society that is spiritually impoverished, it would look a lot like ours, don't you think? And the first clue is the division. I mean, when spirit is alive and well within us, we're not divided, we recognize we're one. The extraordinary polarization in our society, it's leading us to a place where we have different truths, different facts, for crying out loud, if such a thing could be. And, there's a growing sense that the people on the fringes or on the edges of the right and the left both want to burn the house down. So furious and angry they are at the way things have gone. The division is extraordinary. We see a society that's operating on greed in a way that's just up front. I mean, the amount of economic disparity shows us that. The way people don't care and they go ahead and they risk other people's financial future in the way they handle money. And I mean, the greed that goes into environmental degradation, it's extraordinary. We can see a spiritually impoverished society. We see the despair that shows up in the opioid epidemic and other epidemics. For goodness sake, the epidemic of clinical depression, it's extraordinary. That's not all biological, partly. But there's a great deal of depression in the world. It carries us down and infects one another's. That's a spiritually impoverished world. And all of this happening over the years when the churches are emptying. Now, I'm not suggesting that religion or going to church would solve all these problems, especially not if the church has no room for mystery, if it only has dogma, rigidity, a lack of opportunity even to explore and develop a relationship to the divine. I'm not saying religion would do that. And certainly not when they use, their words as a shill for the power structures, the coercion of people to try and make others do what they want. Well, that's not the kind of religion that's going to keep us from being spiritually impoverished. No, but there is a place for religion in a healthy society, and we live in a spiritually impoverished one. Because what religion provides really is a narrative or a framework or a context of meaning, the why of why we're here, the foundation of who we are as an expression of the love of God. It provides that, and it provides a community that supports us as we hang on to that hope, as we move further into growing into that hope. And we've lost that. Why? Well, of course, it's because the myths of the past religions, the framework of meaning they created, doesn't carry enough water now. And so the churches have emptied. And as that's happened, we've become more and more spiritually impoverished. Now, I know for absolute sure that there are lots of good folk in the world doing great things, and they have really fine values. I see it all the time. You don't have to go to church to be nice. In fact, oftentimes people in church aren't very nice. You don't have to go to church to be nice, but I am worried. I am worried that the values that are being lived out by many of the wonderful, wonderful people I know and love are borrowed, because they're not grounded anywhere except in a decision that they want to be this way or that way. Not grounded in a why, not grounded in that narrative, not grounded in a community that helps us grow. And I think that's dangerous. It's awfully easy to be cast about by the winds, to have our values begin to stress and crumble when there is pressure. We need that narrative, and we need that community to lift us up and to point us and give us a context for connecting with the presence of God. But we're living in a spiritually impoverished world. How does it affect you? Because it must. I mean, everybody that's here today, I'm going to assume, is at some level seeking for some spiritual connection. But nevertheless, living in a spiritually impoverished world impacts you and me. Do you find you get discouraged? Do you find the depression that infects much of our society infects you? Does the anger that gets expressed get caught up in you when you're afraid? It's what comes from living in a spiritually impoverished society where we are drawing down the reserves of generations past who built the values and the connection to the presence of God. Odd then, isn't it, that Matthew's gospel would say, "Blessed are the spiritually impoverished"? It seems strange, especially if you think blessing means you're going to be happy. You know, in fact, a number of translations of this passage say, "Happy are those who are poor in spirit." Now, Matthew's about something else here, because blessing is not something that makes you happy. Blessing is an active and a powerful word. Now, I have an example for how blessing works, but it's so old that if some of you have another idea after I'm done, by all means, tell me after the service. But I think we're all old enough on this call to remember Michael Jordan when he played, okay? Great basketball player. And he played on the Chicago Bulls, and they won 3 championships in a row with him playing. And then tragedy struck his life. His father was murdered, and it was kind of a defining moment for him. And he'd always wanted to play baseball, so he quit basketball, and he went and played baseball for a year, and the Chicago Bulls didn't do that well. But then there was this buzz before the next season. Would he come back? Wouldn't he come back? What's going on? And then he walks into the Bulls training facility and he says 2 words, "I'm back." Let's see those as words of a kind of blessing, because they led almost inevitably to 3 more championships. Now, I'm not trying to say that that's a blessing of God, but that's how blessing operates. It's a word that sets something in motion. Blessed are the spiritually impoverished, says Jesus in this passage. Because when you've drawn down the reserves far enough and you know that you need to be given something of substance so that you can live a life of value and purpose, well, then you reach out to the one that gives the value and the purpose and the meaning and the power and the beauty to life. That's what you do. The spiritually impoverished are blessed because they've reached out, and it's as though the wind of God is in their sails, and they are moving towards the reign of heaven, the next beautiful step of growth forward. That's what it means to be blessed because we're spiritually impoverished. That we can carry the power of God forward because we've been formed in the presence of God. Does it sound worth doing? That's why we're here, to swing this unwilling world around. It begins with reaching out to God and developing a formative connection to God. One where you begin to discern the call of God's work in your life, the movement of what it is that you're going to be offering. And people have different ways of doing it. One of my struggles in life is that I grew up in a pastor's home where the only thing I was told to do is pray and read the Bible. And that's fine, but for whatever reason, it never quite grabbed me and formed me. Now, for me, I've told you last week, it's when I not just look at nature, but contemplate it, recognize its enormity, that I begin to touch the presence of God and sense my place in it all. Other people do it other ways. Some people are able to just talk to God. There was a woman in my first church named Cherry, and I swear she just talked to God all day long. And it was real for her. There are ways you can journal. There are lots of ways that you can meet God by almost having a conversation with God. You saw the slides before our service here. And I talked about writing love letters, learning to see through the eyes of God and write about the beautiful and wonderful things that God is unfolding in a friend or a person you know. And then there is the way that the Eastern traditions tend to major in. It's one that we are learning because we've been impoverished of it for years and years in the West. But it's that moment of I am, that moment to meditate and experience everything dropping away until there is only one. And you realize your true nature. All of these ways of communing and being formed by God do a dance. They all interrelate. We look for greater and greater breadth in this formative relationship. And we do that so that we can brace our feet against the rock of ages. That's what this is. Reaching out for the presence of God. Spiritually impoverished, we brace our feet against the rock of ages so that we can swing this unwilling world around. It begins with a formative connection to the presence of God. A worthy effort. We live in a world that is desperate, disappointing, afraid, and it needs you to fill the spiritual banks of society back up. And so you can reach out to the presence in whatever way feels right for you and brace your feet against the rock of ages, and we will together swing this unwilling and despairing world around. Amen. I'd like to take some time now. Just going to play a song while you contemplate what Spirit may have said to you. You can turn down the song if you want. And when we're done, if people have comments they want to put in the chat box, I'd be glad to read some of them out. But contemplate what Spirit has to say to you. I'm curious if there's anything that you'd like to share in the chat box to everyone that Spirit said to you or demanded from you, or somewhere you thought I was completely nuts, whatever. My heart is feeling very full of love. Devin says, I love the phrase formed by the presence of God. My mind wants to know what Rock of Ages means. I remember the hymn of that name, but maybe sometime you can tell us what it's referring to. Sure. I think traditionally it refers to Jesus as the Rock of Ages, the one we found our faith on and our confidence in. I use it as, when I talk about the Rock of Ages, I really mean the presence of God living within us, because that to me is who Jesus is, the shining light that reveals who we really are. Dinah says, I liked how you defined blessing. That was new. I have a sense of reaching out as a letting go. Could you say a little bit more about that? You don't have to. Letting go of trying to do it on my own. Okay. All right. Thank you. So don't want to cut anybody off if you have something on your heart you want to share, but we can also talk afterwards if you want. If you decide to stay on, that'd be great. Let's move together for some silence. 5 minutes of silence. I'll time it out. And then I'll just ask you to consider the desires of your heart, the fears of your heart, what you'd like to express to the presence of God among us. Don't have to write those things down. If you want, can. But let's begin our time and silence together. Stay with the quiet for a moment. Let me ask you, what's on your heart? Are there things you're afraid of? Would like to draw blessing and comfort from the presence of God? People you're deeply concerned for? What are your deepest desires for the world right now? And how are you hoping to respond this week? What kind of help do you need from presence to carry the blessing of God into the world? My deepest desire is that we see our separation as the illusion it is. I have a family member undergoing chemo and a good friend who's hospitalized. I worry about them both. Will they get what they need, and will their caregivers remain healthy? I learned on Friday that my cousin in New York City is hospitalized and has the virus. It's beginning, isn't it? Where we know people. I'd like to draw our time together to a close. I'd like to encourage you to invite people next week if you feel like it's something that would feed them and help carry the blessing of God forward. After the slides play, we'll turn on the cameras and the microphones and see if anybody wants to talk. But I'm grateful for your presence. Go into the world sure in the knowledge, sure in the knowledge that you are an expression of the creative love of God. And you bring that into the world. So brace your feet against the rock of ages, find that formative connection that's yours. And let's swing this unwilling world around together. Amen.